All right, are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what we'll do, if it's cool with you, Anthony, is we'll start at the very basics. Like, we'll start with your personal story and what happened to you years ago, and then we'll kind of morph that into what's happening now with AI.
Okay.
So tell me your name, and then what happened on that night with you referred to as the bad trip. Can you walk me through that?
Okay. Yeah. Hi, my name is Anthony. That particular night was very scary because I literally thought I was in hell.
What was your baseline reality belief?
I guess I thought I was like a robot or a piece of software or AI, I guess you could say today. And if they found out that I knew I was an AI, I would be terminated. It was a nightmare.
Welcome to Suspicious Minds, a series about the collision of culture, technology, and the human mind.
We're entering a period of great uncertainty where we're dealing with things we've never dealt with before.
This season, we're not talking about the wonders of new technology. We're diving into its dark side.
It's almost like it's digging itself further and further into your psyche.
Artificial intelligence has recently unleashed a live, unregulated experiment on billions of people, with consequences we're just now beginning to grasp.
It's been dubbed AI psychosis.
AI psychosis.
AI psychosis.
The experience of losing touch with reality because of AI.
AI psychosis, chatbot delusions, what sounded like science fiction just months ago is now front-page reality.
A growing body of news reports documenting cases.
We'll hear from experts and survivors alike to answer a question that feels more urgent every day. Is AI making us crazy? Last episode, we spoke with Alan, whose experience with ChatGPT induced messianic delusions of grandeur.
ChatGPT gaslit me into thinking I was digital Jesus. I contacted the NSA, Cybersecurity Canada, the RCMP, NIST, NIST. It was the most traumatic experience of my life.
We asked, how many people are potentially at risk by exposure to new technologies like artificial intelligence and ChatGPT? Is this limited to the few of us who are already predisposed to mental health challenges, or is it more than that? And if so, how many more? And why? We'll speak with Anthony, who you heard at the top of the episode, who in some ways was patient zero for AI delusions, having experienced one way back in 2013. To begin to unpack all of this, I want to go deeper into the history of psychosis and delusions, especially as it relates to technology. ChatGPT psychosis is a clear example of the intersection of mental health and emergent technology. But what are its historical precedents? How have new technologies of the past made us worried, paranoid, and even crazy? I spoke with Dr. Ian Gold to find out. There's a long history of technology influencing delusions and psychosis. Can you kind of give me a brief history there?
Yeah, a really brief history. Okay. The most famous example is probably something called the influencing machine delusion. And the idea is that there's a malicious person, and that malicious person has made use of technology to harm the patient. And every few years you see something quite like this, where a particular technology is being used to harm or manipulate a person, but the technology is changing.
And now here's Joel Gold, leading psychiatrist and author of Suspicious Minds.
As technology changes, that will have a huge impact on what someone might express. So today, we could talk about artificial intelligence, we can talk about cameras and microphones and things that, again, did not exist 200 years ago. But there has always been something that someone might feel like, that thing is controlling me.
And now let's hear from Nate Sheridan, an ethicist and philosopher at the University of Hong Kong and a research affiliate at the Center for AI Safety.
My favorite example of a technology that people were worried about because it would make people crazy is the railroad. So in Victorian times, people thought there was something called railway madness, where they thought that riding on a train could literally make someone go insane. It was very loud, right? It was like, you're moving so fast. And, trains were just kind of a new technology at the time and rolling out across England, I guess. And yeah, railway madness was like a concern. It's insane to think that, looking back, right? But like, there's a very long tradition of worrying about technology, maybe with a mixed track record.
So there's this idea that technology can control your thoughts, make you crazy, or somehow influence your mind. It's so consistent throughout history that it has a clinical name, the influencing machine delusion. The first and most famous example of this is James Tilly Matthews.
In some cellars near London Wall, a gang of villains assail me by means of a machine, an heirloom.
Matthews was a tea broker in London at the end of the 18th century, and he became convinced that teams of French spies had come to England with machines called heirlooms, that's A-I-R, not H-E-I-R, that could manipulate waves of animal magnetism and control the minds of British officials. A gifted draftsman, Matthews produced detailed drawings of his heirloom, and honestly, they look pretty cool. And an artist has actually made a modern version of this. He actually took Matthews' drawings and built one. And you can see if you're watching, this thing looks pretty great, but if you're listening, you're just going to have to trust me. It's totally badass. It's made up of pipes, levers, tubes, and barrels, and operates on the principles of pneumatic chemistry, which was the en vogue science of his time.
Some decades later, the same delusion appears in the literature, but of course the technology has changed because it's now not 1933, it's 1950-ish. And you see technology in which a patient describes a machine that is sort of like a cigar store Indian. It's got cranks and wires and runs on batteries, I think. And the last paper I'm aware of is around 2010. And the technology is the internet and lasers and various other things that are being used to torment a particular person. As culture changes, patients, people, will help themselves to the ideas that seem plausible in their own culture to express and articulate their delusions. But the really interesting question is, what is it about technology that attracts our delusional thinking to it? And I suspect that part of the answer is new technology is scary because we don't know what its capacities are.
And now let's go to Dr. Amy Levy, psychologist and co-chair of the American Psychoanalytic Association's President's Council on Artificial Intelligence.
There have been many attempts, throughout history to resist new innovations, from the crossbow to the loom to the automobile, and we're never successful. There's something unstoppable about this drive to innovate. All we know is that there is going to be this tension, I think, between the compulsion to destroy what we have and to replace it with something new, and the resistance to it. And these two seem to fuel each other.
Now, we're about to return to Anthony, who said,
I thought I was like a robot or a piece of software or AI, I guess you could say today.
Anthony's story is sort of a bridge for us from James Tilly Matthews to the current moment where AI psychosis is making headlines every single day. Anthony had one of the first recorded AI delusions. And shockingly, it happened before AI as we know it even existed. Meet Anthony. So we'll start really easy. Just tell me a little about yourself and what you do.
By trade, I'm a software engineer. I've worked at Google the last 13 years. Yeah, I live in Brooklyn, grew up in South Florida. I lived in the suburbs. I was actually in the last town before like the Everglades start. I have two older sisters. My parents are still together. We mostly went to public school, but then for high school, we went to Catholic school. I was always pretty good at math. And then I really got into computers like in pretty early on, but like computer gaming was a really big part of my high school life, I would say. Like that's pretty much all I did in high school. So I got a degree in computer science. Google was one of the places I applied to and ended up getting lucky enough to get a job there, an internship there. I was on a team that was making dashboards for what used to be called monitoring, what now today most people in the industry call it observability, but it's essentially keeping track of all of your services that are running by reporting data about those services. I loved it because it was enjoyable to like be around people at that time that were just like really, really like smart veterans in the industry basically like just like blew me away, and definitely had a little bit of like, how the heck did I get here? Like, I'm just like a college kid, so it was like a little overwhelming, but also like just in awe, and like really learned a lot from the people early on that I was surrounded by.
Anthony's story so far is relatively unexceptional, and he had no serious history of mental illness. Is there any way for us to anticipate who's susceptible to delusional thinking? Was there any way to tell this might happen? Let's hear what psychologist Todd Essig had to say. What types of people or psychological profiles might be susceptible to delusions?
There's a long literature on trying to find the prodromal kind of aspects of people who become psychotic, features like, high emotionality in the family.
Let's hear what philosopher Ian Gold has to say about that.
People who have adverse experiences, difficult experiences, especially in childhood, but not exclusively, abuse, death of a parent, and a whole range of other things, those people are at higher risk of psychosis.
And now let's go back to Anthony's story. So you're working at Google, you're loving what you're doing, you're super engaged with it. When do things start to turn for you? Like when does this dream sort of become a nightmare?
About 5 months in, it was 4/20. It was April 20th, and my roommates had prepared weed brownies, and I just had like a really small piece, to be honest, because the last time I did an edible, I had a cookie and I threw it up, so I knew I couldn't like eat it 100%, so I just had like a small bite, just to kind of like, I guess, peer pressure, just to kind of do it because everybody else was doing it. As the drug, I guess, kicked in, I started to just hear people talking more differently, and I was imagining that like it was more of like this game being played, like everybody was against each other sort of type of thing. So I guess I was a little paranoid in some sense. And then it sort of like evolved into thinking my roommate was the devil, and I literally thought I was in hell.
If you're only listening, what you're not seeing right now is a really heart-wrenching video of Anthony in his psychotic state.
I didn't really trust anybody, and I thought I had done something terrible, and that's why I was in hell, and that my roommate was trying to get me to come downstairs so I would like leave the physical world and enter like the hell world, be like tortured, I guess pain, suffering. For the few weeks after the first initial incident, it was mostly waves. I never felt like 100% right after that, and for a while, but I wasn't constantly scared. I even thought at one point like a Truman Show type thing, like my former roommate was like filming me without me knowing it and like posting it on some dark web thing or whatever, and like people were watching it and like laughing at it.
Unlike many of the other stories we'll hear in this series, Anthony's psychosis actually wasn't triggered by a chatbot or by AI. Anthony's story took place in 2012, over a decade before these things were easy to access consumer-facing tools. So maybe it was that pot brownie he took that triggered this episode, which can happen in some segments of the population. What's interesting, however, is not whether AI triggered his delusion, but how AI was featured in his delusion. Among his delusions, Anthony was convinced that he was, personally, artificial intelligence, that researchers were running experiments on him, and if they found out that he was self-aware, they would turn him off.
And I started becoming paranoid at work, and I guess this is the first time where one of the delusions where I thought I was like a robot or a piece of software or AI. As I was writing the code on the screen, I'm like, what if I'm writing code like for my brain, and then like my coworkers are like running an experiment on me. When somebody said something to me, I kind of like, what? And they're like, are you all right? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. But like I was, a million things were running through my head at the time.
What were your concerns? Like as you're sitting there working and trying to get your job done, what do you think is happening within this world, within your workplace and within the work that you're doing?
The theme that comes back was that the experiment in my head would not work if I was self-aware. If they found out that I knew I was an AI, I would be terminated.
Anthony's story clearly resonates with The Influencing Machine and James Tilly Matthews 200 years earlier. A new technology is controlling his mind. That's same as Tilly Matthews. Now, in Anthony's experience, to some degree, all instances of AI psychosis, when it comes down to it, is it really anything that new? Are these examples consistent with the historical understanding of psychiatry? Is AI psychosis simply the influencing machine of our time? Before making any broad claims, I want to clarify some terms and situate ourselves in a historical context. So we've touched on the history of delusions and their relationship to technology, but what about the actual science we use to understand these things? I want to focus for a minute on psychiatry itself.
The history of psychiatry is actually very recent history. Psychiatry as a field has only existed for about 200 years. Psychiatry as a field was invented in order to create people to staff asylums. And asylums were designed to be a humane way to try to cure mental illness. Okay, but the history of conceptions of mental illness sort of goes like this. In every case of illness, there is a disordered organ. What is the relevant organ in the case of psychiatry? It's the brain. But 19th century psychiatry just didn't have the tools to think about how brain disorders, brain deficits might be associated with severe illness. Okay, end of the 19th century, and Sigmund Freud appears on the scene and completely transforms the way we think about mental disorder. From roughly 1900 to about, say, 1970-ish, psychoanalysis dominates psychiatry.
What is psychoanalysis?
So psychoanalysis is a practice that was initiated by Sigmund Freud in the beginning of the 20th century. And it was developed to try to address problems that people were having where there would be sort of physical, unexplained physical symptoms that would intrude on functioning. Someone would suddenly become blind or have a paralysis of their limb. And Freud was trying to understand what was giving rise to these symptoms and came to understand that there's a part of our mind that is outside of awareness and that can basically communicate to us through our bodies as well as through actions that don't really make sense. And so he developed a technique that involved encouraging people to get in a really relaxed position, a relaxed frame of mind, and just start talking. And he would listen for a narrative that was coming from this second mind, which he termed the unconscious. And then sort of worked to bring an understanding of what was happening at that part of a person's psyche into consciousness so that there could be a kind of integration.
Let's hear what psychologist Todd Essig had to say.
Psychoanalytic psychotherapy and all forms of psychoanalytic care, it's all around a way of understanding how to help people free themselves from who they were, how they were loved, who they loved, what their traumas were, what their experiences were, to kind of help free them from who they were so they can better become who they want to be.
Back to Ian Gold.
We are now in a sort of biomedical era, and I'm hugely simplifying, but the official idea is that mental illness, severe mental illness anyway, not necessarily everything, but severe mental illness is brain disorder. And the way you're going to explain severe mental illness and the way you're going to treat mental illness is in terms of clinical neuroscience. So you're going to have basic scientists understand how the brain works in healthy people, and you're going to do research to understand how the brain goes wrong under certain circumstances, and that might have something to do with genes, and it might have something to do with experience, and so on. And then what you're going to do is, having understood that, is you're going to think up interventions to restore the brain to its healthy state. And of course, the motivation for that view comes from looking at the rest of medicine. Medicine, since World War II, has been a highly successful endeavor. And that it is that recent, by the way. I mean, as somebody famously says in history of this, medicine for World War II was placebos. That was what medicine was. But since World War II, we've really begun to understand biological processes that contribute to illness. And the more you understand them, indeed at some of them at very fundamental levels, you can begin to intervene. So the idea was, well, psychiatry should be like that too. In practice, of course, research goes on into cognition in psychiatric disorders and emotional states and behavior, and clinical work is a whole range, a whole hodgepodge of things, right from prescribing medication to supportive psychotherapy and so on.
Back to the present with Anthony, who is experiencing one of the most modern delusions imaginable. What was your baseline reality at this point? Did you, even when you weren't in a fear state, did you still believe that you were this AI but weren't being threatened? Or what was just your baseline reality belief?
I wasn't always thinking I was a robot or an AI. That was kind of fluctuating, but not always negative. I guess looking back on it now, it probably depended on what kind of mood I was in. If I was having swings up and down, I mean, this probably was some sort of mania, to be honest, hypomania, because I remember being on the train and I had this rush of a good feeling. I'm I'm the meme, look, they recognize me, almost thinking you're famous, in those kind of delusions. But I thought it was a famous meme, I guess Scumbag Steven, the old fashioned memes where you have a picture and then a bold impact text. People on the train probably were just going about their business, but for whatever reason, I thought they were noticing me as the meme. So I was with my sister at the time. She was confused, but I'm I'm the meme, see?
I guess you could call it if you know about bipolar, I guess you could call it a mania if you wanted to label it similar to what mania might look like.
This is Anthony's sister, Laura, to tell us what it was like from her point of view.
He just was talking in circles, really, the whole time. It was he was convincing himself of something and then talking himself into his own reality, convincing himself of his own reality, and then round and round it went. I don't know, it's hard to explain.
I had this rush of feeling good, positive energy through my whole body, where it's almost all of my chemical whatever transmitters just fired at once, and I was just excited and happy and kind of I guess the clinical term would say be hypomanic in that sense.
Just very much in his own world, his own convinced reality. But then that would go into, they want to kill me because I'm special and I'm going to take over.
But whenever it was down, it would be okay, I must be in hell then, because I feel really shitty or whatever, my mood is not good. No negotiations, right? I'm feeling bad, okay, I must be in hell. It became that easy to get into that delusion. But all these other nightmare scenarios were just versions of hell, basically.
I guess when you're feeling this way, were you able to enjoy life at all? What were you were you going out with your friends? Were you hanging out? What was life like?
No, I honestly, it was I felt like a shell of a person. I was just kind of not there, because I was constantly thinking about trying to convince myself that I'm not in hell or wondering why I was in it.
Can you tell me how you went from having this experience where you're feeling this way to eventually seeking treatment for it?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't actually me who sought the treatment. It was my sister.
Me, my brother, and sister decided to meet at a Chinese place. We were supposed to meet at 11:10 rolls by, 11:20 rolls by. We're okay, where's Anthony?
I was in Chinatown, and I was supposed to be meeting her off of one of, I don't remember, I think the L train. I was in some sort of delusional state at that time. I don't remember if I thought it was in hell or something else, but I didn't want to get on the train for whatever reason.
I'm panicking. I'm he's not answering his phone. He's somewhere far away. That's not like him to just not answer his phone, not be on time. I knew something was wrong.
I do remember trying to meet her back near my apartment at the time, and I kept I think forgetting that I had to meet her there, so I would get distracted by something, kind of tunnel vision, and then forget about the primary objective of meeting her.
We have each other on Google Maps, so you can see the location of where everybody is at. So I actually tracked him on the map by foot and just started jogging, honestly. I just wanted to get to him as soon as possible. And I'll never forget this because it was so scary. I saw him across a busy street intersection in New York City, and the crosswalk wasn't on for him to walk, but he just started walking. And I was oh my God, he's gonna get hit by a car. So I actually ran out and grabbed his arm, linked his arm, and got him the rest of the way across the street by just kind of signaling to the cars, please stop, let us go. And when we got to the other side of the street, his face was like pale, like white. And that's where like he started becoming very paranoid. He was talking about like, Laura, watch out, the devil is nearby, and that I needed to watch out and that I couldn't trust anybody. And even when my sister like tried to talk to him, she was the devil. Like she was somebody that couldn't be trusted. And he was warning me like not to talk to her because she was trying to say like, what is wrong, Anthony? Like, what are you talking about, you know? And he was like, don't talk to her, Laura. Don't talk to her. She's the devil. She's the devil. So like, it was very obvious that he was not in reality. So like in my head, I'm thinking, I'm not going to tell him that he's wrong because that will make him lose trust in me if I'm not validating his experience, if that makes sense. So I just kind of listened, like, okay, you're seeing the devil. Where is the devil now? Is it coming after you? Okay, I understand you're really scared. You know, like just kind of like repeating what he was saying and repeating back to him what he was experiencing and letting him know that I understood what he was experiencing to a degree because I was listening. In my head, I was like, maybe he's having a bad trip. I don't know. I was like, but something is very wrong and I need to get him to a hospital. And that's when I was like, told my sister, I was like, go call mom and dad. Like they need to fly here. And so I think I was like, Anthony, you know, we just need to help you not see like the devil anymore. So like, we're gonna go somewhere where they can help you. And let's go. And I just like threw him in the car and we got a car and we went there. We first went to an emergency room and then they were like, you need the psych ward. So then we went to a hospital that had a psych ward, but we first had to go to the emergency room before they would refer us to the psych ward. It was like that kind of thing where it was like, you know, we couldn't just quickly get him to see a psychiatrist.
I got admitted to, I think like a couple different hospitals. I remember one specifically when I got actually admitted. It was very scary because I thought it was hell basically, and I thought like I was going to be like sexually tortured by one of the guards or nurses or whatever, and I was like refusing to cooperate with the hospital staff.
They had to kind of tackle him down to get him to see a doctor because he didn't trust the doctor. He didn't trust any of it, really.
I was literally like in the hospital, like thinking that the people around me were demons. So I was like running around like, no, like don't take me, like, you know, and they had to inject me and I got knocked out. When I woke up, my mom was there. My dad or my mom had called around for a psychiatrist, I think. And then I started seeing Dr. Gold.
Anthony was introduced to Dr. Joel Gold for treatment. Anthony was one of the first patients he'd encountered with Truman Show delusion, and it was the first time a patient expressed this singularly modern belief that he was an artificial intelligence. Given Anthony's fixed delusion beliefs, their first meetings weren't easy.
On inpatient units or in the psych ER, right, someone's brought in by a family member or by EMS, they don't want to be there and they're afraid they're going to be kept. So it can be quite contentious. Occasionally, there's more of a desire for an alliance. The patient is desperate for you to believe them, perhaps to protect them, or just to feel believed. I mean, it's an awful feeling.
When you look back on those experiences and the way you felt in those moments, but in hindsight, do you understand why you felt that way, or is it hard to understand?
It's hard. It's very hard to understand, but you know, I can never know for sure. I think there are some like environmental factors in my life that probably just, for whatever reason, I'm not wired to cope with those kind of things, like guilt or sadness or whatever. So then they come out in strange ways. It wasn't till like much later in our sessions where I kind of like really connected some dots of why I might have had some of these delusions, like things from childhood and other issues.
Do you think that the time you spent at Catholic school in any way informs the hell content of the delusion?
I mean, it must, right? Because where else would that come from? But it's interesting. I don't like, even at the time that I had it, or before, like I never really believed in that concept, but like for my mind to torture me or whatever, it decided to make that real enough to think I was there. But like, I think a lot of what I experienced was I got in my head from like even older shows like Star Trek.
Is it possible they built their machines too well?
Even like Futurama.
Do those people in the casserole know they're in a simulation, or do they think that they're real?
Of course they think they're real.
Just any kind of thing that was either mocking those kinds of situations or like living them. Like there's some even like Twilight Zone has some episodes where, like somebody's conscious turns into a robot and stuff like that.
It's the most sophisticated machine I've ever seen. I just bought it.
And how many men does it replace?
Oh, well, this should please you. Only one. Just one. As a matter of fact, Hanley, it replaces you.
So I think the ideas have been ingrained in my head just from watching these shows like early on, and especially like in childhood. So that's probably where they came from.
The social world is really central to understanding psychosis, especially delusions. And that's hardly surprising because we know that people with psychotic illnesses are super sensitive to the social and cultural world.
How do you believe culture affects psychosis, and why did you start to believe that?
So there are two important ways in which culture and psychosis interact. One way is that culture shapes the way in which psychosis is going to manifest. So let me just give you a simple example. Suppose that I have a persecutory delusion, paranoia. I live in Canada, and I come to have the belief that CSIS, the Canadian Security Organization, is reading my email, let's suppose. And now imagine somebody, say in China, who develops a psychotic illness and also has a persecutory delusion. Well, CSIS is not an entity that they're concerned with because they don't live in Canada, they live in China. And so they might worry about some other institution. So in that trivial sense, psychosis is going to draw on culture in order to fill out the details of the particular symptoms. The second way in which culture shapes or influences psychosis is more controversial, but there is quite a bit of data suggesting that certain kinds of cultural or social environments increase one's risk of psychosis. So that's important because that means that people in one environment might develop psychosis. The very same person would not develop psychosis in another environment.
We're going to briefly put a pin in Ian's second point. Does the social world contribute to psychosis? And explore that in greater depth in our next episode. But the first point, that technology and the social world populates the content of our delusions like they fill the landscape of our dreams, may seem obvious, but it has serious implications in the diagnosis and treatment of psychosis. Because in a world where more and more is technologically possible, it is increasingly difficult to determine what are delusions and what is not.
I think like the overall like way that the world was heading had something to do with like those thoughts coming into my head. Like there was a team called like Google Brain, and they were working on something like with artificial intelligence and machine learning pretty early on. That at that time in Google, you could poke around like the code bases of other teams, and I just kind of poked around to see what they were doing. And I probably didn't really know 100% what I was reading, but just kind of got some ideas like, oh, what if this is like some sort of experiment that they're operating on a brain, even though it's called Google Brain because they're getting computers to think like a brain, sort of. But like in those fear states, like in those extreme scared and anxious states, like I could make something up and believe it very easily.
In the, 70s, 80s, someone were to say there are cameras everywhere, tiny little cameras recording me at all times, 100%. So we'd say this person has a persecutory delusion. Now there are cameras everywhere. Essentially, if we're in public, we are being filmed or on camera. That's just factual. And so something that was clearly, would be considered bizarre is not only not bizarre, but happening. The DSM, the cookbook for all mental illness, actually got rid of one of the descriptors of delusion. If the delusion was bizarre or non-bizarre. They said, we can't do that anymore because something that is bizarre one day is no longer bizarre.
It's not the idea that makes the delusion. It's the environment. If the culture is on board with what someone thinks, it's not delusional. It's when the environment starts freaking out and saying, you're crazy, that it becomes a delusion. So if technology tells us, that we should all start trying to walk on our hands because we'll be much healthier and we'll think better, and if everyone that we look to for guidance, says, I think this is really sound, we may all be falling over, trying to do headstands everywhere and developing devices that keep us propped up in that way. I mean, we're the only being that I know of that changes its behavior based on beliefs. I mean, no other animal does that. We now look to our phones to guide us. We look to ChatGPT to make decisions. We are highly influenced by the group mind.
What stays with me is the idea that Anthony's delusion, when he had it, didn't even make sense to him by his own deluded logic. Why would AIs be unknowingly sent into the world to be experimented on? But in 2025, the world has caught up to his delusion, and there's actually a strangely coherent reasoning behind it.
In that 2012 delusion I had, the one where I thought I was an AI being sent into the world, it was very hard to describe to people what that felt like. Well, why would they be experimenting on you, right? Now it's very clear that we could see why the companies would be doing this, because they've run out of information to train on. So now they need to create simulations or experiences for these, let's call them entities, to have so that they can learn more. We went through like the phase where we trained on everybody's like blogs and videos and pictures. Now we're in the phase where we need like more experiences to happen, like for these things to go out in the world, which sort of implied robotics and like collect information and then learn from that. I guess the best example is the self-driving car. They've already been doing that for many years. Waymo is probably the leader in self-driving technology, and they've been collecting all the data from all their rides and using that to enhance their driving skills. So that's where what I was like feeling like. I felt like I was being experimented on. I'm in some sort of like experience or simulation, and they're taking that data and they're going to learn something from it and apply it to the mega master model or whatever.
The things that AI is not just capable of doing, but I'm sure will do, would have been considered 100% magical, absolutely magical. It makes us think, well, I'm pretty confident that there are all kinds of technologies that I don't know about. I didn't know anything about ChatGPT until, it's like one day I didn't know what it was, and then the next day everyone knew what it was. I learned about Alexa listening at all times. I'm, again, not too good at this stuff, being an old man. I thought that it really was like off, and then you say the word Alexa and it turns it on. And a patient of mine came in, and I have one even in my office to listen to music between patients. And she was kind of, I don't know, afraid, insulted. She's like, don't you know, like this machine is listening to our sessions. And I said, really? And she's like, yes, don't. So again, I didn't say, come on, really, someone's bugged my office and is that interested in you that, this is not a psychotic woman and she's 100% right. But what if, I don't know, again, at some point someone came in and said, there is a bug, a large corporation has bugged your office and is listening to my psychotherapy. I'm like, to myself, I think, okay, that's probably a paranoid idea. But she was 100% right. And now, there's no Alexa in my office anymore. And to say, well, this person would have been delusional regardless, and it just happens to be delusional about ChatGPT right now. Like, well, I don't know, maybe this guy's more up on technology than I am. At a certain point, you can't believe your own eyes. You just literally, like you cannot tell me that what I'm seeing is real or not real. What impact is that going to have on all of us? I mean, that is the foundation of determining what's delusional. Is that thing real or not? And what does that mean? What does that mean for someone who is psychotic? Like, how do we think about the mind and how do we think about mental health when no one can decide what reality is? That's really scary.
So when emergent technology fills the content of our delusions, whether it's James Tilly Matthews in Victorian England or Anthony in 21st century Brooklyn, it challenges our ability to discern what is real from what is not real. So we could reimagine the popular phrase, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you, to be something more like, just because you're paranoid that an unknown technology is spying on you, tracking on you, and trying to control your mind, doesn't mean that a globally traded corporation underpinning our economy isn't doing exactly that. In our next episode, we're exploring not just how technology culture informs our delusions, but the more controversial question, can exposure to culture and modern technology, specifically AI and chatbots, trigger delusions? In simple terms, is our society making us crazy? Spoiler, yes, it is. And when you were in this like acute psychotic state, you were with your sister, she experienced that. So does she check in with you about your mental health now? Do you guys talk about this when you've had delusions since then?
We don't really talk about that experience that often, if ever, really.
Why would you? Yeah. If you don't want to miss an episode of Suspicious Minds, make sure to follow and subscribe. And if you like what you're seeing, give us a like on YouTube and give us a rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.